Good evening and welcome to the Shelburne Historical Society Speaker Series. We have been doing for 5 years. We've been in existence. We started off as a group of people who helped to organize the 250th celebration, and we decided at that point that we should really organize a historical society in town. Believe it or not, Shelburne had no historical society active at the point of 5 years ago. So we incorporated, so it'll be in the spring of 2019, we'll have our 5th anniversary. I'm Dorothea Pinar, and I'm the current president of the society, and I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. I wanted to make an announcement. This is kind of a special time for us. The Historical Society has received a grant, and that grant is from the Champlain Valley National Heritage Partnership. It's a grant that's a federal money grant that comes from the National Park Service, and it's administered through the Lake Champlain Basin Program. We're very pleased to have this grant, and this grant is for $3,800, and we will be matching those funds to do several things. One is to establish a scanning project, digitizing historic documents and photographs so that we can place information on a website that can be accessible to all people, so that you don't have to go to the clerk's office to look for a document or any of the, or ask us for photographs or different kinds of documents that we might have. That we'll have it all scanned through the years, and so we're going to be writing a protocol. That's what the money is for, and for the equipment for that. And we'll also be purchasing display boards, because we are going to have a permanent location when the town hall is finished renovated in the lower level. The town has offered space for the Historical Society to be there. In that space, we'll be able to have different kinds of exhibits that will come in, activities, small discussion groups. We'll have our scanning equipment so that if you have historic photographs or any kind of interesting things that have to do with the town, or family history of prominent Shelburne families, we can scan it right there. You don't even have to give us the document if you don't want to, but we'll have that ability to scan those documents and digitize the information. We will also have a vault, so if you do donate things, they will have a safe place for those documents to be, and photographs and objects to be stored safely. So we're really, really pleased about this, and we hope that if you're not a member at this point of the Historical Society, that you would really sincerely consider it. More membership means more support for us, and the quicker we can sort of develop our programs. In the back, you'll see we have a board that shows our mission statement and our goals. We have some very lofty goals that we would like to be working on, and this move to the town hall and this grant will really jumpstart our program. So we're very pleased about it. So we have membership forms. So if you're not a member, please consider being a member and support us on a regular basis. It just helps us figure out our budgets and figure out how much money we can put towards different programs. We also are going to be helped out by some of the scouts. We have a Boy Scout who's going to be building us display cabinets for our new place, which we're really pleased by. Yeah, so yay, Scouts. So tonight, we are so pleased to have Brian Knight to come and talk about his work that he's been doing for the town of Shelburne. We are what you call a certified local government. And that means that we have certain committee organized and certain expertise within the community that we can get certified to do historic preservation type projects. Being a certified local government means that we can receive federal funds through the state. And this year, we decided it was very important to finish a National Register nomination of the Falls District. It had been nominated. We had a nomination form done about 5 years ago, and it needed some reworking a little bit. And so through the CLG grant, the Certified Local Government Grant, we were able to get Brian to come and finish this nomination. You're going to hear tonight the product of his research. And it's amazing because I used to do this kind of work in the dinosaur age, and in your National Register nominations are not easy. There's a lot of research that goes into it. Brian is a wonderful researcher. He's a wonderful historian and preservationist. He also did a project for us, about 10 years ago, I think, an oral history project where some of us did taping of people in the community, and Brian not only transcribed those tapes for us, but he really took in a bunch of sources and he really made it quite a resource. That will be digitized for you too once we get our scanning project, so you can read that. Brian has a resume as long as my arm, so I'm not going to bring up all the things that he's done, but he's amazing. He's worked for both government and nonprofit organizations. He was the curator at Hildene in Manchester. He's created exhibits. He's an author. In fact, I think it's your latest book, right, on snowboarding in southern Vermont. Sounds interesting. He's quite a resource for us, and I just want to figure out one thing. How can we get Brian to move back to Shelburne so he can continue doing his work for us here? So without much ado, I would like to give you Brian Knight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I have done a lot of talks in the last 2 weeks, and this by far is the biggest turnout that I've seen. I've spoken to groups of 2, and then I doubled it to 4, and then just last weekend, I think I got up to 6. But now you've just blown all of that out of the water. So I'll try not to be too nervous. Just as a caveat, you just heard that the Shelburne Historical Society is a fairly new organization, and that digitizing project will be great because I'm sure a lot of you or some of your friends or whoever is out there is sitting on a lot of great photos and other information. And one part of this process of this National Register nomination was there wasn't that many photos out there. So a lot of this presentation will be A, based on maps, and B, based on photos of what it may have looked like as far as a blacksmith shop or a sawmill or a grist mill. But even just sitting here, watching people walk in, somebody out there has this framed picture of the sawmill. So the events like these do bring in great new information. I've already learned what the sawmill looked like just by being here. So that's great. Okay, off to a stellar start. Let's see here. Most stories of Vermont towns start with this guy right over here, Benny Wentworth, governor of New Hampshire. He's the one that will grant all the town charters and will also lead to a lot of those controversies between New York and New Hampshire over who owns the land. The charters will look kind of like this, divided up into lots of land, and the charters will have land laid out for a town center, for glebe, for church services. Benny Wentworth kept a big chunk for himself as well. And there was a part of the deal was you had to work the land, clear the land, and live on the land for a certain amount of time. And as a process of clearing the land, cutting all that timber down, and also building your house, you have a need for wood, and so you have a need for sawmills and eventually grist mills as well. So that's where the Platte River comes in, because of the ability to harness the energy at the falls. So Ira Allen is going to buy large tracts of land here. And is there a light that can go right here by any chance? Oh, this will work. The glasses will work. I'll go with the glasses. So he realizes that there's the ability to harness this power, buys lots of land, comes up here in the 1780s, and builds a log bridge, a rudely constructed log bridge, right across the Platte River. So you can get easy access to Heinsberg, Charlotte, and Burlington via an old stage road. Then he builds a mill upstream in 1785. And this wasn't the only game in town. He's also building mills in Swanton and Winooski. And he has this guy by the name of James Hawley with him, who comes up from Arlington. That was pretty much Ira Allen's first stop-off before he comes up here, or one of many stop-offs. There's the Ira Allen house down in Sunderland, Arlington area. So he brings James Hawley up, and he builds all these several sawmills. James Hawley also builds a brick residence near Shelburne Falls on present-day Spear Street, and I do not believe that it exists today. It is? All right. So a lot of industries sprouted up around the river. Lozelle Hatch built the first sawmill in Shelburne Falls, located directly east of the public house built by Benjamin Harrington. So using, I don't know if that's the actual building built by Benjamin Harrington, but probably the right proximate area. And if it was directly east, it does make sense, and there's no other properties between the Harrington house and the falls. So when you're looking at a house that seems pretty far away today, but it is the next neighbor over. So it does make sense that it was directly east. This dam that he builds was not very well built, and was built on top of light soil, and was soon carried away and swept away. So that first mill did not last long. And then in 1786, there's going to be a dam that's built at the lower end of the falls, and then a grist mill put into operation around 1787. And these mills actually attracted settlers too. A lot of times towns would require that a sawmill gets set up early, because it would be an incentive for people to move to the area, because they knew that they had the ability to convert this wood. In 1789, David Fish erected a clothing works, which consisted of a carding and fulling mills between the saw and grist mills, and also another pond. So this is a map from the late 18th century, and it's a great map, because this is a map of the entire state of Vermont. And when you get these state-sized maps, you don't really get the details. When you get a county map, then that's where you can see the details, and then the town maps are great. But remarkably enough, this map does point out there's a grist mill, an iron works, and a sawmill all right in Shelburne. And you don't get that level of detail that early. So I found that pretty cool right there. 1783, farmer Richard Spear lived in the northeast corner of town. He had to go great distances to the nearest grist mills. Down to Virgins, he'd bring his product. Then it would go to Whitehall, New York, and then it would go up to Quebec. So one of the first houses that is still intact in Shelburne Falls is what I call the Burritt Wheeler House, built about 1794. Ira Allen originally owned the land, and then he sells it to Israel Burritt, who was a captain in the Revolutionary War, and was also from Arlington, Vermont. So maybe, this is conjecture, maybe he knew James Hawley, who worked for Ira Allen. Maybe he knew Ira Allen down there. Could have been a relationship there, but that's conjecture. And he doesn't live there that long. He sold it back to Ira Allen about 2 months later. But so Joshua Isham, who plays a very significant role in the early history here, purchases the property in 1799. And he purchases the grist mill, the sawmill, and the fulling mill on both sides of the river. He was from Williamstown, Connecticut, and then he moved up to St. George in 1784, and then comes to Shelburne 9 years later. He ran a store in Shelburne Falls, probably in this area here. So that's not a good map for comparison's sake, but I'll talk more about that in a bit. And he also held many public offices here in town, including town clerk from 1793 to 1812. And he will build a home on the south side of the falls, which it was known as the Bliss House. This is an 1857 map I'm showing you here, so we don't have any maps prior to that. So a lot of these maps, I'll show you the location of the building, but it's going to have an 1857 name. In general, these town maps are an amazing resource because what they do is tell you who lived in the house in the 1850s and the 1860s. A great way to launch any research project is starting with these types of maps. Joshua Isham owns about 96 acres on much of the land south of the Falls Road. He does also own land on the north side as well. He built the house, which is no longer standing, and lived there until 1840. And then his wife continues to live there, and then his daughter, Laura Isham, lives there. And then son-in-law, Horace Wheeler, lives there. So we're still talking about this house right here, just for reference point. And then the family of Moses and Sophia Bliss will live in the house. So that brings us up to this map here, where we know through land transactions that the house eventually goes from the Wheeler family, who are descendants of Isham, to the Bliss family, and now we can sort of tie in everything because now we know the Bliss live at that spot right there. So that's sort of the nature of the research. You sort of have to piece together the puzzle. So the Wheeler family will also live in that house, and they will use the water privileges. They'll have access to the grist mill and the sawmill. And then they're going to sell the house. They have a carriage factory, as that suggests. They're going to sell the house to Daniel Moore in Hazelton Lake. And so now we know Daniel Moore lives in the house. And then they also own the plaster mill and the grist mill. And they also own the circular sawmill south of the Falls Road as well, and another building down here. And they're going to own it until about 1874. The partnership's going to break up, and Hazelton and Lake will no longer exist. And then from that point forward, the sawmill and the grist mill is going to go through a lot of different ownership. And then in the later years, like early 20th century, there's a blacksmith shop in that building, and then also the Short Sleeves family, they ran a small store in the basement, and they also had a road stand, probably right out by the road as well. So here's an example of not having a picture, but there is a picture out there somewhere now, so that's great. So the sawmill will go through lots of different owners, and he'll sell it to Isham will sell it to Nathan Fish, and he'll put up a fulling mill and a grist mill, and then also a potash factory as well, with Isham always retaining rights to the water. All these transactions involve giving some land away, but we also want to keep the water. During this time, though, a lot of early deeds refer to this area. When I'm reading not deeds of the actual property, but maybe a neighboring property. On multiple instances, this area is referred to as Isham's Falls and Isham's Mills. So it actually had an early different name. This house was not in Shelburne Falls. But it is a house that belonged to a gentleman by the name of Thaddeus Tuttle. And had a house on the south side of the road, probably in this area here, as point of reference. It's like the first 4 buildings coming from Falls Road towards us in that general area. And he's from Wallingford, Connecticut, moves to Vermont, forms a partnership with a guy by the name of Guy Catlin, and he's in the lumber business. He buys lumber all over Vermont, not even just around here, up in Westford, up in Essex, and he's all over the state. He sells his store. It was known as the Old Red Store Goods and Old Red Store. So we know it was red. And he'll sell the store to Joshua Isham in about 1797. Then he's going to move to Burlington and become very successful in the lumber trade, and then build this house up, which is on the UVM campus now. Some quotes from the time. Tuttle was a fast and free liver, generous to a fault. There was no limit to his hospitality, his house and table free to all and always filled. He was very impulsive and passionate, but quickly over it and incapable of harboring malice. He did get into a nasty lawsuit with his partner, Catlin. They were in court for about 16 years. And he actually ruled in his favor, but it didn't end up well in the end. This is a quote from the time, too. But in the meantime, the lawyers had eaten up his substance, squatters and others had stolen the lumber, and a fortune had been spent. His habits also helped him on his road to poverty. He was not educated in business habits, was careless, took no receipts, and when he died, his estate was settled and there was nothing left that his children could legally claim. So he rose and fell. So not totally an accurate map because I don't know exactly what buildings were here, but this just gives you an idea of some of the buildings and sites that were here around 1810. The Isham House, which becomes the Bliss House, is no longer around. Tuttle had his Old Red Store, not around. We know there was a sawmill, a gristmill, and a dam along the river. And we also know there was a forge south of the falls as well. So the only house that I truly know about is the Israel Burritt House. And then probably other houses great distance away. So we have not many houses, but a lot of industry. And most likely Tuttle lived in his house and had the store in it as well. So we're going to move, actually, when I was hired to do a National Register nomination. It's a defined district, and this house is outside of the district. It was owned by Henry Morse, and he'll own a lot of the land basically over here. So he might have been the next closest neighbor to this house as well. He was best known for raising sheep. He specialized in French merino sheep, and following 1811, when sheep were imported into Vermont, the sheep industry is going to take off here. So with the sheep industry taking off, plus we have these mills, we got a perfect recipe here. He showed his sheep, often winning at the state fairs. 1853, he won the highest prize for French merino sheep. He also raised oxen and steer, and also won lots of praise and awards for his animals. 1868, the house will go up for sale. A description of the sale says it was well watered with plenty of wood and timber and good fruit. It consisted of well laid out lots, a large dwelling house, a cheese house, and 3 tenement houses. The farm was located on the Virgins Road, 3/4 of a mile from Shelburne Depot and the same distance from Shelburne Falls. So the Shelburne farmers would drive their sheep past the falls and up Irish Hill to what is known as the Sheep Dip, or known as Sheep Rocks, at the south end of Shelburne Pond, where the sheep would be scrubbed before shearing. And then they would be brought back down to Samuel Fletcher's mill. And that's right about there. So pretty much right across from the Burritt house that I showed. By 1836, the sheep population pretty much outnumbered humans. Throughout Vermont, there were about 17,000 sheep in Shelburne in 1840. Quite a bit. So next house that we have here is the Benjamin Irish house, up high on the hill here. He was described, Benjamin Irish came from New Hampshire, a native of New Hampshire, was considered a sterling pioneer of Chittenden County. He purchased his land in 1819, built a house in 1820. He'll live there until about 1857 and sell it to a man by the name of Digry, D-I-G-R-Y. And here's another thing that gets very confusing in research. There's going to be a Moses degree in this town, which is like spelt like the degree that you get at a school, and then you have this degree or degree or whatever it is. So the first thing my mind goes, did they misspell it, and is there just a phonetic mistake there? And then you go down a rabbit hole of trying to use different variations of spelling and trying to see if it was a misspell. Don't think it was, but it did take up a couple hours of my day. Then he'll eventually sell the property to the neighbor across the street, Jennison, and he'll have a 140-acre farm at this end of town. And then we're jumping from an 1850s map to an 1860s map, and so we have degree here, and then we'll see that it's a new owner who is Nathan R. Tracy. And even though he had 140 acres, this Jennison guy, he still made, this was always be a 1-acre lot, and always referred to with a brick house and 2 barns. So is it the only brick house in the district? I believe it is. This guy Tracy is actually related to Hazelton Lake, who owned the grist mill and the sawmill right across the street, river right here. So they're related. So here's the other half of the degree. So this is what I call the Tucker Degree House. This land was owned by Isham, and then a man by the name of William Tucker will own the land in the early 19th century, and he had a joiner's shop there. And then it will be sold to Samuel Fletcher, who will have a woolen mill to the east of the property, probably down to the east, right here, woolen mill. And then he also owned the sawmill as well. He does lease part of his land to a guy by the name of E.A. Brownell for the purpose of erecting a building for a paint shop. So there will be a paint shop somewhere in this vicinity as well. I don't know exactly where. Brownell in 1840 offered a house, sign, and carriage painting in the neatest style in the most reasonable terms. Samuel Fletcher will sell the house, which include the place where I now live, and also the factory buildings situated at Shelburne Falls, together with the fixtures and machinery, including copper kettles, press plates, shearing machine, regulator, picking machine, and cording machines. So at that time, he owns all of that right there. Moses Degree will buy, he's a butcher. He'll run a butcher shop in the down low in the basement here. He also has a fairly modest farm as well. He had 1 horse, an ox, 4 pigs. He grew rye, wheat, corn, peas, potatoes, and oats. Also had a small orchard, selling about $30 worth of orchard products in 1860. He had one cow that produced 150 pounds of butter and 10 pounds of cheese. By 1880, he has hired some laborers. He's increased to 5 cows. He is a butcher. He also purchased 30 heads of cattle and slaughtered 20 cattle, so he has a pretty active business there. But he also does something in 1880. By 1880, the sheep industry is kind of phasing out, but he does, between 1870 and 1880, he buys 50 sheep. But he also slaughtered the same amount that year, so he was not using it really. He was focused on the meat, most likely. He had a pig and 20 chickens. The chickens produced 50 dozen eggs in 1880. A lot of this information comes to census data, and just the ability to get a real snapshot at these farms from 1850 to 1880 is fantastic. So the grist mill, right here, and also right here, there's no building, but you can do find evidence of a industrial past down there. It would take an archaeologist to really discern what everything means, but there is a lot of piles of stones, random pieces of stone, and so there's a story down there, and you can see it down there when you are down there. A picture of the sawmill a lot later. We'll also have a variety of owners over the years. So 1830, we are getting some more houses. We've added, if we go back to 1810, so we've added the Judson. We'll have a house and a store here. We have the original Bird Isham house, the gristmill and the sawmill. Now we have the Irish house up on the hill. Tuttle will have a house here. I forgot to label that. That's probably the Fletcher Tucker building. And then Isham and Bliss will be down pretty much where the business offices are on Falls Road. So we have the Ira Andrews house moving up the hill a little bit. Joshua Isham deeds this land to Ira Andrews in 1825. Part of the transaction was to make and keep and repair a good and sufficient fence around said premises forever. Andrews was a wheelwright, wagon maker, and coffin maker. He also cut clothing from wool cloth finished at the fulling mill. He had a pretty large shop. Here's a description. A large shop which afforded him a good business. In those days, he turned out ox carts, stone boats, wooden axle farm wagons, buggies, bobsleds, sleighs, and cutters. He took pride in his work, and he had a business to feel proud of. He also made coffins on order, cut to measurement. He never had more than 2 or 3 on hand, and they were usually sizes for children. And furthermore, after the sheep shearing season was over and the fleece delivered to the wooling factory and a toll taken, the balance was made into cloth and brought home. Families would come from far and near to have him cut their cloth for them to measure. Ira Andrews would also serve in the state legislature in 1843 and 1844. He was described as distinguished for his probity and uprightness. He was a man of strong and religious convictions, though not a member of the church. He also took interest in political affairs, always voting Republican. He held various town offices and served as collector and constable for 16 consecutive years. He'll sell the land to Nash. So we don't have a Andrews there, but that is C. Nash, who's also a wagon maker. And he'll live there through the 1870s. Charles Nash is his name. On the other end of town, whoops. So we've been sort of down by the falls, but now we're at the far end, near the junction here. Henry Morse, who I was describing, owned all that land and was known for his sheep. He'll sell off parts of his land. He'll sell land to Jonathan Taylor in 1841. He's a doctor. Originally from he practiced in Champlain, New York, and Georgia, Vermont before coming down here. And some quotes from the time about Taylor: a strictly honest, upright man, and when he found his patient's ailments were largely imaginary, he bluntly told him so, for the doctors of the day knew little value of psychological treatment. According to patients, Taylor gave pills as big as your two thumbs, and to pull a tooth, he sat the patient on the doorstep below him and applied the forceps. Being a large, powerful man, one can picture the result. That's not a quote from that era. He also maintained a small farm. So what's interesting about a lot of these houses, which are sort of focused around a commercial and industrial history, they also have most of them have small farms. He had one horse, one pig, produced corn, oats, and potatoes, 2 cows. He also cut hay. And he added, in 1860, he added bees to his farm, producing 15 pounds of beeswax and 16 pounds of butter. And he had a small orchard as well. So a lot of these, in addition to the fields for the food, they had apple orchards and, in this case, bees as well. Now, going to the other side of the town, back around, Jennison, who I was talking about before, had 140 acres for a long time. He will sell in 1860. A gentleman by the name of Philo Percival lived here. He worked in the grist mill, so not too far away. Just had to sort of walk down the hill. And Percival will come back into the story a little bit later. He worked in the grist mill here, and then he'll move out of town and work in grist mills a little further south, and then come back in the 1890s to work for the grist mill. In 1864, Smith Pearson, S.F. Pearson, will buy the house. He was a farmer and a man who was highly respected by all who knew him. And he was a descendant of Moses Pearson, one of the original settlers of Shelburne. So when I've been talking about the original Isham house, which went to the Bliss family, it was basically in this site right here. And George Bliss lived here for a very long time. His father, Moses Bliss, had 46 acres of farmland here, 6 horses, 4 cows, 4 pigs, corn, oats, peas, and potatoes. Had orchard products as well. And he also had 3 Canadian farmhands living on the house with him in 1860. So his business was booming enough to bring in some extra help as well. 1864, this house is offered for sale. Described the place known as the Isham Homestead at Shelburne Falls, containing 105 acres of land, about 12 acres of wood. There are about 300 bearing fruit trees in this place, choicest varieties of apples, pear, plum, and cherries, together with a large assortment of all the best similar fruits in the garden. Stocks and tools will be sold of the farm if desired. So he probably owned a lot of the land going south as well. This house will be purchased by a man by the name of W.R. Lawrence, which I will talk about a little later as well. But that is the same Isham house, Bliss house, and now the Lawrence house by the 1860s. So more in the center of town, I don't have the map for it, I apologize, but Degree will move back towards the center of house. That is not him. So this is an example of me taking some liberties and those aren't his tools. And so don't, that is his house, yes. So he's a carpenter, most likely built this house and a barn. Lived here with his wife, his mother, and 3 children. 2 of his sons, James and Timothy, were a carpenter and a blacksmith, respectively. He'll sell the house back to the person he bought it for triple the price of what he bought it for. So suggesting probably he got a empty piece of land, built the house, and was able to triple that value. So the Papineau house. So that was owned by they lived in the same house. They were the next owners. So by 1860s, we have now a name associated with the house. Seen two different spellings of this. The Papineaus were from Quebec, so you have the more traditional EAU ending. This is NOW. And so they'll live there for many years. And that's not a Papineau. Saxton's house, George Saxton. He'll have a farm and a store here. And a lot of people went and visited him. In 1866, somebody entered into the diary, harnessed up the horses and went down to Mr. Saxton's after some peas to sow. He also owned a 133-acre farm somewhere in West Shelburne as well. Won a lot of awards for his vegetables and fruits and animals. 1863 at the Chittenden County Fair, he wins Best Autumn Dessert Apples. 1848, he won awards for Best Grade Cow and Best Grade Bull. In 1866, and somebody wrote in their diary again, Mr. Saxton came tonight. He's a man that father has been expecting to do something about some sheep marks. So he probably came up and branded the sheep as well. A few days later, Saxton returned and made a letter for marking sheep, this guy's father. Mr. Saxton, I think, was the finest marker, but we all did really well. And I just assume that's branding. It could mean something else as well, marking your sheep. And that's a picture of the Chittenden County Fair right there. So this land, we're at the Gosselin House. This land originally belonged to a man by the name of Lemon Judson. He had a store up here in the early like 1830s. This isn't his house, but he had a store up there. E.A. Towsley will buy the house in the 1840s. He'll own lots of land in the general vicinity. And then he'll sell the land to two people, Leander Chauvin and Francis Gosselin. And Gosselin was a shoemaker. And it doesn't really show up because of the picture, but it does say there's a shoemaker right up there. And then Samuel Basford House. The shoemakers will sell some of their land to Samuel Basford. He'll live here with their 7 children and a servant. And he worked primarily as a ship carpenter. He also operated a store as well. His kids were also ship carpenters. They'll live here for several years, but then when Samuel Basford dies, the family picks up and they move out west. Basford will also run a wagon shop right down south of the falls there. But he will, 1867, he will sell the wagon shop to Daniel Moore and Hazelton Lake. So now Hazelton and Lake own both sides of the river. So some of the houses that are up in 1850 blacked out any of the ones that were here beforehand. So we're seeing the town starting to spread out a little bit, become a little more dense, start to get sort of this the feeling that we see there today. And just to give you comparison shots there. The George Curry House. This is purchased by a name by George Curry and his wife Rhoda. Purchased it in 1852. It'll be known as the Curry Place for most deeds from there on out. He was listed as a blacksmith, but he was primarily a store owner, and there was a store right in the spot right here. He also had a small farm. 6 acres of land, 1 cow, 2 oxen, corn, potatoes, and also some orchard products, produce butter. And then he's going to divide this land in the 1880s, and this is where it gets really confusing in terms of deed research. It just splits off, and you're off in totally different directions. This is definitely one of the most challenging property to research in that regard. Sometimes it's really nice when you just have a nice, clean, linear transfer of land, but once it starts dividing off, it becomes very difficult. So he also had a shop down, well, his brother lives here, Simon Curry, and then we also have a shop up here. It's probably Simon and George Curry. There's a dilapidated building in that area, mobile home here. And there's also a blacksmith shop down there. And so that could have been the Curry blacksmith shop as well, because we know in 1870 he was listed as a blacksmith in the census. This is an 1867 map or 1869. So that could also be his blacksmith shop as well. Some diary entries from somebody else in the town, from Julius C. Tracy, the son of Lee Tracy. 1866, he went over to the falls after the wagon I took over yesterday to be fixed. Later in the month, he wrote, went down to the falls to get the carriage fixed. Curry told me I would leave it here. He would keep it in repairs. Simon Curry, his brother, owns a trip hammer mill from 1842 to 1870s, and also the blacksmith shop as well, most likely. He lived in the house that was there when I started the research, and when I came up this winter, it was no longer there, but that was his house. Had also a small farm, 1 horse, 1 cow, grew small amounts of peas and potatoes, and the cows did produce butter. So in 1890, Curry was dying of rheumatism and was expected to live a few days. His creditors say he's a judge insolvent, and the house and the property is going to get divided up, with his wife continuing to stay in one building, but the other buildings are going to be sold off. One of the earlier people to move into the house was Hollis C. Woodworth. He's going to, right around this time in the 1890s, there's a creamery opening in town. It's not the creamery that will become the famous one that burnt in 1919, but an earlier version of it. Woodworth also was a wheelwright, and also his wife ran a hat store in the building as well. And then we have Thomas Thompson entering the scene. And Thomas Thompson, he lived here, also ran the store, and he'll run the store for several years, and then he originally bought a store or a building across the street in the 1890s. That burns. He bought it with Moses degree, so it was very close to that house, very close to this area here, but that burns in 1898. So it seems like he's sort of scrambling for a new place, and he'll move into the Curry house and set up a store there. He's going to be back and forth quite a bit in this storyline. In 1901, he does sell his household goods and horse and carriage. He sold it to Philo and Sarah Percival. Now Percival, I was talking about him earlier, he worked in the mill, and then he's going to move down south, work in some other mills. When Walter Palmer buys the grist mill, he's going to move back up, and he's also going to buy a store. But he's also going to rent the store to a guy by the name of Henry Goodsell. And he was a produce dealer and sold fresh and salt meats, and he's going to move right across the street into this house here. And the Goodsells will run a store for several years. They also set up the stores across the street. They'll also rent it out to a guy by the name of Pete, who's going to run a liquor store in the town as well. He was from Shelburne and Highgate, lived in Starksboro, had a dairy farm, and also was quite the dealer in pelts and furs. also representative for Shelburne and Montpelier. So he did quite a bit of it, different things. After he closes the tavern and liquor store and then moves back to his farm in St. George and gets back to the dairy life and the trapping life. So back across the street here, James Cowan is going to buy the Goodsell store, and he's going to form it with Goodsell. And he first worked out on Shelburne Farms and then his father's farm, and he's going to operate the store until Thomas Thompson comes back in 1910 and runs the store for another 6 years. During this time, there is a room attached to the back of one of the outbuildings. A lot of meetings were held there. This is an early example of a meeting, 1913. The Shelburne Falls Progressive Club. A lot of the people who lived in town were part of the club. Enos Douglas will live in the town. Louis Hebert will live in the town. Mrs. Fred Bacon will live in the town. And then Mrs. Thomas Thompson. The object is to progress and improve Shelburne Falls Village. It was voted to at once begin improvements on the sidewalks. So this room, known as Thompson's Hall, will also be lots of other meetings, including the Modern Woodmen of America as well, will hold their earliest meetings in this building as well. Now, going back down the other side of the road, we know there was a schoolhouse on this site around 1801, somewhere in the vicinity of here, and then a blacksmith shop was here in the 1830s as well. Not much other information about that could uncover about that property and its occupants. Hathaway was a blacksmith. He has a blacksmith shop on this property. He's here in the 1860s. He will sell the land and then he'll move out to the lake. And he has a nice little house in the present area of Shelburne Farms. He also opened another blacksmith shop somewhere near present-day Route 7. But then he's going to give that all up and come back, and he's going to come back to Shelburne Falls and then set up a blacksmith shop once again. His sons will also be in the blacksmith trade as well. So here's a good look at in the 1860s of the district. You have Morse down here outside the district, schoolhouse outside the district. Newell owns pretty much all the land north of the falls. But between 1875 and 1877, the population of Shelburne was a little over 1,000. Businesses in Shelburne, this is just not Shelburne Falls, included E.L. Whitlock's Flour, Grain, and Feed at the grist mill. Bartlett and Smith sold lumber at the sawmill. Maybe this is all the falls, I apologize. Simon Curry and Hathaway were the blacksmiths. Carpenters, a lot of carpenters. You had the Ship Carpenters, the Bassfords. Enos Douglas was I'll get to his house in a little bit. He was a carpenter. Members of the Bacon family were carpenters. You had wheelwrights, Samuel Bassford and Ira Andrews, and then George Curry and Moses Degree were the two merchants. So we have the Curry house right around here, and Moses Degree is probably right there where it says store. Towsley House, built in 1869. This land belonged to a guy by the name of Lemon Judson. He'll sell it off to Towsley. Towsley had a small farm as well, 5 horses, 2 cows, 2 pigs, 10 sheep. So he's taking advantage of the sheep boom. Produces 40 pounds of wool in the 1870. He also operated a store, most likely on the site, which was destroyed by fire in 1867. Newspaper from the time says, was destroyed by fire about daybreak Wednesday morning. Nothing was saved. Mr. Towsley losing even his books and papers. He had just sold out, and his stock of goods which have been sold down, consisted of mainly boots and shoes, which were valued at $500. So luckily, he probably had a sale before it happened. Everything, he didn't have as much inventory that went out. A later owner will be a man by the name of Walter Palmer, who will own the grist mill, and he'll leave the area in 1921, where he will start the Corbin and Palmer Funeral Home in Burlington. Lawrence is going to buy pretty much all of the Isham Bliss property, and he's going to have a large orchard there, also a fairly large farm as well, over 60 acres. And he also had a lot of workers on the farm as well, paying $300 in wages in 1870. And then the Lemerise store, another challenge in terms of research. You would never know how many different ways you could spell Lemerise. Quite a few. So I don't even think I got all the different forms. So once again, land that belonged to Isham. Lemerise, his parents are from Quebec. His father was a saddler. And they moved to Burlington initially, and they worked at a C.A. Hibbard's boot and shoe company in Burlington. He'll move to Shelburne, and he has one store across the street for a couple of years where he leases the building, but then he's going to decide to build his own building across the street. So in 1901, he purchases a lot from A. Hathaway, and decided he'll build a store and a shoe shop. 1901 newspaper said he commenced the building of a new store at Shelburne Falls and begun digging a cellar. Fred Bacon was the builder. In November of 1901, the wall was all completed for his new building, and Fred Bacon will build the frame as soon as the lumber arrives. 1902, Lemerise put up a large addition to his new store. When completed, his store will be occupied by Goodsell and Smith. So it gets a little confusing because he's building himself a store, and almost immediately he's leasing it out to another group of people. And so even though he builds the store for himself, Goodsell and Smith will be the first occupants of the store. And they'll be there until about 1904 when Goodsell and Smith moved to East Charlotte. So I mentioned Fred Bacon. He comes up a lot in these transactions, the Bacon family. He was a carpenter. He built many buildings throughout Shelburne. And I'll just list some of the homes. It may be familiar or not, but the homes of Frank Moran, Emerson Thorpe, John Coleman, James Gates, Bert Monet, and Edward Fredette. He also built the Lemerise store and then several barns, including the barns of Coleman and Bartlett, and the Shelburne Falls School. He had 5 children. He was also served the town as a selectman from 1905 to 1908. Went to the Chittenden County Republican Convention and served with the Modern Woodmen of America as well.
Quick question for me.
Yeah.
The date of that letter from the selectmen?
That is early 1900s. I believe it was like 1906.
Things don't change.
That's funny. Bacon Bacon's son, William Bacon, he will also be involved in the town quite a bit, served the town as postal carrier, worked with the Shelburne Grange during World War I, served with the UVM Mechanical Corps, but during the war remains in Vermont and actually trains carpenters for the war effort. He had a farm outside the district, marries Daisy Whiteside in 1912, who's going to inherit a lot of this land in Shelburne Falls in the 20th century. So going back to Lawrence, he buys a lot of this land, and then in 1889, he's going to deed the land to a gentleman by the name of Lee Tracy. And a lot of this large parcel of land on the south side of Falls Road is now going to get divided up into smaller lots, and we're going to see a whole bunch of new houses coming up in the 1880s through early 20th century. He lived in this house and ran a store in this building as well. Many different names of the store: Mead and Tracy, Tracy Van Vliet and Russell, and Tracy and Van Vliet. He was a Morgan horse breeder and worked for the Burlington Woolen Mills. He was also quite an active farm where he wrote to his son in 1869, "We have a nice bed of onions. Our peas are almost big enough to eat. Our tomatoes are nice, some as large as a good-sized apple. The bugs are determined to eat the vines. I'm resolved to fight them. Fruit is going to be plenty. Cherries are ripe on the 2 or 3 trees. Rats are as plenty as ever, although we gave them poison." He also serves as a real estate agent, so his name is going to also be in a lot of transactions throughout the early 20th century. His son will also work for him in the store, and his other son, Charles Lee Tracy, was actually a well-known organist and pianist who lived in New York City. So some of the houses, some of the lots that are responsible from this subdivision of the Lawrence property. Lemerise will live here, and he'll also have a shop here, I believe, for a few years. The Quinlan house. The Quinlan family came from Ireland in 1839 and lived in Charlotte for 50 years. Had a large farm in Charlotte, about 1,200 acres. Michael Quinlan will serve in the 1st Vermont Cavalry in the Civil War, and then he'll operate a blacksmith shop in Charlotte before moving up here. He also had a wheelwright business in North Ferrisburgh in Charlotte. Served the town in many different capacities. Selectman, he was a candidate for senator, candidate for sheriff, candidate for state's attorney, but he'll go bankrupt in 1899 and everything comes to a crash. I think that's the second house, though, second attempt at a house, because uncovered this newspaper. The recently completed Shelburne Falls home of Michael Quinlan burnt to the ground. The fire started in the vicinity of the chimney and was discovered in the afternoon, but had gained such headway that it was impossible to check it. The house on either side of the doomed building were in great danger, but the vigorous work of the Pale Brigade, aided by the wind, were saved. So he probably started this house, burnt, and most likely built that second house. Enos Douglas house. He also comes down from Canada. He will be a carpenter as well. And this is the map of Shelburne Falls as it stands today and as part of the National Register nomination. A lot more buildings because the National Register nomination includes the barns and the outbuildings as well. So a little more dense. So the mills will go through lots of different ownership from the 1870s on through 1927. Hazelton and Lake, as I said, will go bankrupt, and then Lee Tracy, who built all those or sold all those that land, will buy it, and it will be divided between different owners, between the gristmill and the sawmill, and a whole slew of people between 1876 and 1921. Daniel Spear, James Denman, Charles Russell, H.C. McNall, right up there, David Hunter, Walter Palmer, William Sheridan, Dr. Seward Webb, and William Bacon all own the gristmill. David Hunter did own the mill in the 1890s. He was a Scottish immigrant, son of a Scottish immigrant, born in New London. Primarily a paper maker, he worked with his father in North Bennington. But the North Bennington mill will burn, and he'll move to Fairhaven, and then move to Essex Junction and Milton, always involved with the mill business, and then finally coming to Shelburne Falls and giving up the paper trade and focusing on a gristmill operation. He'll sell the mill to Walter Palmer in 1900, and Walter Palmer invests a lot into the mill. He hires Philo Percival, the guy I was talking about before, who moved down to the southern Vermont, actually middle Vermont, and worked in several mills. Brings him back up, recruits him. Percival owns the Thompson store for a little bit. But Palmer will, newspaper article from the time, had the building completely overhauled and installed new grinding machinery. Palmer did significant repairs to the mill, which is an old landmark of the Falls, which has been completely overhauled, remodeled, and arrangements for a much larger business. He's going to install all this new equipment, and it's really going to increase the output of the mill. Another article from the time just describes the dam, which is a solid stone structure and one of the most substantial in Vermont. The water power, fed by hundreds of small streams from foothills, is more uniform than is found on many streams. So the Platte Falls will continue to generate good power for the mills. Seward Webb jumps into the scene for a little bit. He'll buy, in 1906, he'll buy the power plant and mills at Shelburne Falls, purchased from the Palmer brothers. It is understood that Dr. Webb will utilize the plant to furnish power for the electric lights at Shelburne Farms in place of the steam power plant used at present. And surprisingly, that story just sort of disappears. I was not able to find much more about that. I'll stay in the Webb family until 1952, when Vanderbilt Webb will give the property to the Trinity Episcopal Church, and the Noonan family will purchase it from the church in 1963. So back to the site of the Isham House, the Bliss House. Lee Tracy will buy it, and he'll start a creamery on the site. It'll be known as one of the best equipped creameries in the town. It had 6 rooms, finished mostly in natural wood, shellacked and with Georgia pine flooring, laid in lead and oiled. Power is furnished by a 15-horse power engine and a 20-horsepower boiler. The plant is also equipped throughout with Marsh steam pumps. The capacity of the churn is 600 to 800 pounds of butter, and the double cream vat holds 600 gallons. So it's quite a substantial creamery, but it will burn in 1919 because of a boiler mishap. But apparently the cooperative was already planning to relocate the operations to Shelburne Village, so it was, even though a disaster, they were already thinking about getting out, and they already had other buildings lined up for the new one. The grist mill will continue to be operational. William Bacon will run it for a while. Have just installed 2 20-horsepower electric motors for grinding and can turn out your grist at the rate of a bag a minute while you wait. Also, I handle all kinds of grain and feed. I am located on the site of the old creamery at Shelburne Falls and will gladly welcome your patronage. So, not in the old gristmill site. He moves it to his site is further away from where the gristmill had been for a long time. And Fred Bacon will sell his interest in the gristmill and sawmill at Shelburne Falls. So the Bacon family owned it for a little while in the early 20th century. So more houses coming in. Now we're getting a much better snapshot of what we see today. Pretty much these houses are the ones you see today than any of the houses that were built after World War II in the village. So the modern woodman of America. This is originally a house for Jonathan Taylor, the doctor that love to pull out people's teeth. And it will go through several ownership, and then the Modern Woodmen of America will buy it in 1914, Fraternal Society. They used to be meeting in behind the Curry store down the street. But when they moved in, they altered it, removed the first floor partitions, put in square columns. There was a meeting room on the second floor, which hosted many weddings, political rallies, dances, and parties. There was a first floor dining room with long tables and also a kitchen that helped serve all these functions. A lot of different meetings were held there. The stockholders of the Shelburne Cooperative Creamery met there. During World War I, the building was used for fundraising for the American Red Cross. When America entered the war, there was a farewell party held in the building for all the young men of Shelburne who were heading off to war. It was a polling place and a town meeting hall until new buildings were built later. There was a garage here in the early 20th century as well, a gasoline garage, and there was also a tavern on the site as well. So the flood, my nature of my research, we chose 1927 as a period of significance for a National Register nomination. So the nature of my research does stop at the flood of 1927, with the flood taking out a lot of all of the gristmill and the sawmill sites, and sort of ending this industrial history of the town, which doesn't say the village has lost its significance in any way. It's just the nature of the document and creating a document that is that will be well presented and can make a really good case in terms of a National Register nomination. Doesn't mean the history of Shelburne Falls ends. Continues to be a vibrant town in the, well, that's a lot of bugs, as Dean pointed out to me the other day. So it's, but I do end there, and I do appreciate you all coming out tonight, and I will take questions if you have any, and thank you.
Anyone have any questions? We have several people who live in the district. If you have any additional information you guys want to give us, that would be great too. But anybody have any questions for Brian?
Gentleman here.
Okay.
Thank you. Brian, on the, what would be the east side of the La Platte when you go across the river? There appears to be an old barn or structure there. What was that?
A gentleman by the name of Charles Ball had I think a sawmill in the building in the 30s and 40s.
Was it a water-powered sawmill or electric?
I think it was electric.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last man to run a sawmill there was named Walter Ball. And I'm Tim Thomas. I grew up here in Shelburne. The last man to run a sawmill was Walter Ball. And that was part of his operation where that barn is. And all he had over there was his planing mill in that island. There was another building that he had his sawmill in, and that run by a regular big old gasoline engine. So all he used the water for was cooler on that gasoline engine. And he used part of that barn for his horse. He had a horse named Daisy. He lived there for years.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I'm interested that throughout your presentation, which was very good, I'm sure we all appreciated it, you kept talking about relatively small area of territory. However, you kept talking about farms, that these people had farms. I mean, were they associated with the house? Did they extend back? Were they remote somewhere else, or what?
A lot of the owners did have remote farms, that's for sure. Like the Lawrences definitely had a larger farm elsewhere. A lot of it was done on site, especially the lots did go back. Definitely self-subsistence farms. They were a little bit of both to answer your question. A lot of them own larger farms elsewhere. A lot of them did it right on site. And kept, as I was saying, a lot of them were one ox or one pig and one cow, so just enough for the family. Only a few of them really got above, 10 of any certain animal, and those were the ones that kind of made more sense, outliers on the edge of the village, so they had more land to sort of expand. But most of the ones that were in closer were small.
The other thing that struck me was the number of times you said somebody owned a store. Now, I'm assuming that, you talked about a relatively long period of time, so stores would come and go, but there wasn't that large of a population to support many of these stores.
A lot of the earlier stores were mill stores that were focused directly towards the workers, it seemed like. A lot of these basement sort of operations. And then as you get more population, then you have more of a general retail. But even in 1875, there were only 2 real merchants that sold a variety of goods that would be a general store by standards. But a lot of the earlier ones were much smaller and probably were just focused on the workers.
Thanks for this. This was fascinating. How distinct were the village and the town at that time? Because you showed some of the structures that were actually in what's now the village, and I had often heard that there was quite a distance, which may have been some of those farms, but I'm curious about how distinct they were.
Well, fairly distinct. I think a good indicator is when you're looking at the old newspapers. They have the local happenings, and there's always an entry for Shelburne and always an entry for Shelburne Falls. So enough to have enough gossip and news to generate their own little section in the paper. And I sort of use that as a good indicator, really.
Anyone else have a question?
So now that you've done this research, and are you planning to designate, or is it already designated as a historic site, and what are the ramifications of that?
Well, we're in a rough draft stage right now. The ramifications are that you don't have to worry. You can do anything you want to your building. So that is probably the biggest myth, is that the government's looking down on you and you can't paint your house any color you want. It does. Actually, the local design review board has much more control over that kind of activity than a federal designation. What it is a response to urban renewal in the 50s and 60s, when the urban blight in the city centers were crumbling. And so under the administrations of Eisenhower and Kennedy, they tore down the city centers and built civic centers and commercial centers and government centers. But before we could even sort of react, we realized we lost a lot of traditional villages and streetscapes. So they developed this program as a way to identify historic resources, but also create a review process is really what it's about. Is now if there's any federal money used in any type of undertaking, it's going to trigger a review process to make sure that the widening of the road or the building of a bike path or anything that may affect the integrity, the visual integrity or the integrity of the layout of the village or the integrity of an individual building, it just makes sure that somebody just can't come in and do it. And it will make sure that we can evaluate what's going on. If it's avoidable, we'll try to work it. You can work out a solution. If it's unavoidable, there will be methods to document any lost resource. But it really just opens a dialogue between the property owner and the builder, the contractor, the developer, the funding sources, and it just makes sure that we just don't tear our history away with the move of a bulldozer overnight or anything like that.
I just want to add one more thing about that. The village is on the National Register, the village proper, and it has been very important because, of course, Route 7 goes right through our village. So any federal money that, for instance, if they wanted to widen, and there's have been many times discussions about widening to 4 lanes through the village, it has to go through a review. And being on the National Register, the impact to the historic value is assessed, and it has helped to maintain a smaller profile for Route 7 through the village. Any other questions?
I was wondering if the little school, which I remember as Little's Candy Store when I was a kid, was that shared by the village in the falls, or?
I didn't do much research on it, so I do not know. I know there was a school closer in the falls in 1801, so that served the community, but that's pretty early in the history of the Shelburne Falls. Looking spatially on the map, it seemed like it definitely served the falls. And I'd have to look at the larger map to look at the different school districts. That same map I've been showing you, you can see the whole town, and it actually divides it up into school districts. And you can look at the map and see it's district whatever 10, and then you can find the schoolhouse in there. And that, I can look right after this and answer that question.
Brian, just to the left of that barn, there's a little house that appears to be very early that's kind of set back in the bushes, falling down. Do you know what that is or was? Was that significant?
You mean not in the picture, but there?
Yeah,
today?
it's not in the picture. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to show me afterwards, just to.
It was in one of the pictures.
Yeah. It's
I think it was like 8.
oh, covered with, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the question again?
Pardon?
What was the question again?
I can't, yeah.
The
person
question?
living- Yeah, was living there.
Yeah, but
I
No
don't,
one's lived there for
Yeah.
quite some time, and Unisauce was the last person.
and even though whatever you may consider that house, it's very intact and is eligible for the National Register. So just the fact that it needs a paint job or some repairs does
yeah.
not make it
Right. Yeah,
ineligible for the National Register.
good. Anybody else?
Any other questions? Well, thank you, Brian, tonight for wonderful discussion. And I want to have all of you, there are refreshments back at the table, and we can continue to discuss history. And as always, if you have pictures, I know when we had a discussion last week of the property owners on the falls, pictures, we were talking about those kinds of things. It's really helpful. This is why the scanning project is so important. You don't even have to necessarily give us that item if you want to keep the original. But we can get this material out there and continue to add to the knowledge base of our historic town. And knowing about our town, it helps preservation. I'm a preservationist, and that's where I come from, that avenue that the more you know about it, the more you then value those properties, even if they need a little paint. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.